There was something deeply wrong about that silent street, something so heavy that even the wind seemed to hesitate before crossing it. No one there had the slightest clue that at that very moment, a simple act of arrogance was about to awaken a force the entire village had forgotten existed. It all began when the brothers known as the Shan Yu Giants, bullies who ruled the area with intimidation and barked commands, dragged a young woman through the center of town. She wore a red dress, her expression caught halfway between fear and disbelief. The villagers watched in silence, frozen in place. Broad daylight brutality wasn't common there, but no one dared challenge those men, towering, muscular brutes who treated fear like a badge of authority. But someone on that street seemed strangely unaffected, or at least that's how it looked. Sitting on a small wooden stool by the roadside was a massive man with a straw hat shading half his face. He didn't yell, didn't stand, didn't so much as flinch. He was simply tightening the laces of a worn-out boot. To most, he looked like a regular laborer, just some shoemaker. Until you looked closer and realized his physique seemed carved from stone, and every movement flowed with calm, deliberate control, almost meditative. His name was Chen Huan, though hardly anyone used it. Around the village, he was just the shoemaker, a quiet man who had arrived months earlier and fixed shoes without ever involving himself in trouble. Yet now, his silence drew more attention than any scream ever could. The young woman, Mei Lin, tried to pull away, but the brothers held her tight, ignoring the horrified looks around them. "Is no one going to do anything?" she shouted, her voice cracking between fear and fury. That was when one of the bullies finally noticed Chen. "Well, look who we've got here," he sneered. "The mighty shoemaker. Gonna save someone today, or are you just gonna keep tying shoelaces?" His sarcasm echoed off the old stone walls. The villagers looked at Chen the way people look at a spark in dry grass. He finished adjusting the lace, pulling the knot tight with almost ritual precision. Then he slowly lifted his head. His eyes, once calm, now carried something else. Not anger, not fear, just absolute resolve. The quiet certainty of someone who carried a power that didn't need proving. "You've made enough noise for one day," he said, voice calm but sharp. "Let her go." The brothers burst into laughter, like he had just delivered the joke of the year. "Or what? You gonna fix us too?" one taunted, shoving Mei Lin back and stepping forward. The crowd recoiled. Someone whispered, "He has no idea who he's dealing with." But the truth was, the bullies were the ones who had no idea. Chen stood up, and it felt like watching a fortress gate swing open. The entire street seemed to shrink around him. Broad shoulders, a solid torso, a posture too perfect to belong to an ordinary craftsman. Everything about him made it clear. This man was anything but a simple shoemaker. It wasn't just physical strength. It was the way he breathed, the way he planted his feet, the way the ground itself seemed to acknowledge his balance. Mei Lin, trembling, managed to whisper, "Mr. Chen, please." He stepped forward, then another step. With each one, the brothers' smirks faded. The biggest of them tried to intimidate him, spreading his arms wide, leaning in and growling, "Take one more step and you'll regret it." Chen took the step, but before the threat could even land, something happened, so fast, so precise, so silent that the crowd didn't understand it at first. The first brute lunged, but Chen slipped aside with the ease of a seasoned master. In one fluid motion, he touched the man's arm and redirected his force sideways. The giant lost his balance and dropped to his knees like he'd been yanked by an invisible chain. The second brother tried to counter, but never even completed the move. Chen turned, shifted his weight, and neutralized him without striking anything dangerous, just pure technique, precision, and the man's own momentum. No one fully grasped what they had just witnessed. They only knew it happened in seconds. And not one of the infamous giants had managed to lay a hand on the shoemaker. Mei Lin covered her mouth, stunned. The villagers stared in disbelief, and the brothers watched their arrogance crumble in front of everyone. Chen took a slow breath and said, without raising his voice, "You've bullied this village long enough. Today it ends." And there, under the burning sunlight of that old street, everyone finally understood. The shoemaker had never been just a shoemaker. He was a hidden kung fu master, waiting for the right moment to act, and that moment had just arrived. The tension hanging over Huangxi's main street didn't fade once the bullies hit the ground. If anything, it grew heavier. The silence that settled over the village was so deep that even the distant clatter of wagon wheels sounded like it belonged to another world. People stood frozen, stunned, watching as Chen Huan, the shoemaker everyone had believed was just an ordinary man, remained exactly where he was, steady and unshaken, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened at all. But nothing about Chen's life had ever been ordinary. When he sat back down on his little wooden stool, calmly adjusting the same worn boot he'd been tying before the chaos erupted, Maylene was still struggling to catch her breath. Her eyes were wide, not just from the scare, but from the shock of realizing that the quiet man who stitched leather and replaced soles every day carried within him a strength and a skill that felt pulled straight from an old legend. "You," she whispered, stepping toward him cautiously. How did you do that?" Chen lifted his gaze, and for the first time that morning, the villagers noticed something they'd never seen clearly before. His eyes held the weight of centuries of discipline. It wasn't arrogance. It was the composure of someone who understood his own power and chose carefully when to use it. "I just moved what they were already carrying," he said, his tone free of mystery, almost philosophical. "When someone comes at you with too much force, sometimes all you have to do is let it pass." Maylene swallowed hard. She couldn't tell if the answer was simple or impossibly deep. Meanwhile, villagers began inching closer, as if needing to confirm with their own eyes that they had truly witnessed what they thought they had. People who normally avoided looking directly at Chen now studied his every movement with a strange mixture of respect, relief, and curiosity. Among them was Master Yao, the elderly caretaker of the village's tiny writing school. He leaned heavily on a crooked cane, but his eyes saw farther than anyone else's. "So it was true," he murmured, softly enough that only Chen could hear. Chen frowned. "What are you talking about?" Master Yao took a slow breath, the kind of breath carried by someone who's held a secret for too long. "Stories reach me, boy, and some speak of a gifted student, a warrior who vanished from the world after a great tragedy, a disciple of the legendary Silent Wind School, a young man who mastered techniques only the most disciplined could ever learn." Even those who didn't fully understand the meaning of his words leaned closer. Maylene stood motionless, barely breathing. Chen turned his gaze away for a moment, as if pushing back memories he'd rather keep buried. "That man doesn't exist anymore, Master Yao," he said quietly, yet the weight of his voice said far more than the words themselves. The old man smiled faintly, like someone who recognizes the truth even when it's denied. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you're just trying to hide someone you were never meant to bury. Skills like yours don't disappear, Chen. They only sleep until the world demands them again." Maylene watched the exchange like she was witnessing something far larger than she had imagined. But as the conversation unfolded, a group of villagers rushed toward the fallen brothers. They weren't injured, just disoriented, humiliated, and deeply shaken by how easily they'd been taken down. Their pride had suffered far more than their bodies, and in the middle of all that commotion, a rumor began spreading. The brothers hadn't acted alone. Someone else had sent them, someone far more dangerous. Huo Jian. The real problem in Huangxi. Huo Jian led the group that controlled the village taxes, manipulated trade routes, and used intimidation as his political tool. The Chang brothers were just part of his muscle. If they were acting openly in broad daylight, it was because Huo had allowed it. And once his name began circulating through the crowd, a fresh wave of fear spread with it. Maylene glanced toward Chen, startled by the thoughtful look on his face. "They're not going to stop here, are they?" Chen didn't answer right away. He seemed to be reading the air, as if sensing something larger moving beneath the surface. "No," he finally said. "They'll be back. And next time, it won't be just two." Maylin felt her stomach tighten with dread. But Chen stood up, placed the straw hat back on his head, and spoke with calm, quiet certainty. "And when they come back, I'll be here." And in that moment, the entire village understood. The quiet shoemaker had just become their only real hope, and the fight was only beginning. Word of what happened that morning spread through the village of Huangshi like wildfire racing across dry straw. Within hours, everyone knew that the feared Shanyu giants had been taken down in mere seconds, and that the man responsible wasn't a soldier, a mercenary, or some representative of a martial arts school. He was simply the quiet shoemaker who lived and worked on the main street. That revelation flipped the village upside down. Some villagers felt safer than they had in years. Others feared the chaos it might bring. And everyone knew exactly where that trouble would come from. Huo Jian, the man who ruled the region through force, influence, and intimidation. After recovering from their humiliation, the Chang brothers were dragged by Huo's men to a warehouse on the north end of the village. It was where Huo preferred to hear reports, make decisions, and enforce his will. The space was simple, but carried an oppressive air. Hanging lanterns, maps of the region, crates marked with trade symbols, and guards stationed at every corner. When the brothers staggered inside, still dazed, Huo Jian was seated at the long table, studying documents with the cold detachment of someone who considered everything and everyone expendable. He slowly lifted his eyes. "You lost," he said, his voice calm, "to a shoemaker." The two giants shifted uncomfortably, trying to explain, but shame clogged their throats. Chang Bei finally muttered, He's not an ordinary shoemaker." Huo's brow tightened. "Then what is he?" The brothers exchanged a helpless look. What they had witnessed was too fast, too strange, too impossible to put into words. Trying to explain it felt like trying to hold the wind in their hands. You know it swept past you, but you can't grab anything. Huo Jian rose slowly and walked across the room. His boots cracked against the wooden floor. "If a man like that shows up in my territory without invitation," he said, "it means either he's running from someone bigger, or he's here for something I haven't figured out yet." He turned to Chang Bei and Chang Tao, "And either one of those possibilities interests me." The silence that followed was laced with threat. Huo Jian hated surprises, and a man who could drop his enforcers as casually as tying a shoelace was a surprise far too large to ignore. Meanwhile, on the other side of the village, Chen Huan had returned to his routine as if nothing had happened. But beneath the calm surface, his mind was working. He knew he had crossed a line. After that morning, there was no going back to the shadows. His small workshop was quiet. Leather tools lay neatly on the table, and the familiar smell of polish and wood carried a peace that didn't match the storm forming inside him. Maylin appeared in the doorway, knocking lightly before stepping in. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. Chen nodded. She took a few steps forward, inhaled deeply and said, "People are saying Huo Jian is coming after you, and, well, everyone here knows what he's capable of." Chen didn't answer right away. He picked up the boot he'd been stitching and ran his fingers along the edge, grounding himself in the present before confronting the past. "My whole life has been made of conflict," he finally said. "I didn't come to Huangshi to fight. I came to rest. But sometimes rest meets the war long before the warrior does." Maylin studied his face, trying to read the layers behind that steady calm. "If you're tired of fighting, then why step in against those two?" Chen lifted his eyes. "Because you asked for help." She froze, unable to answer. Something unexpected stirred in her, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. In a village used to being ignored, hearing someone say that was like receiving back a forgotten piece of dignity. Chen continued, "I can't stop what's coming, but I can stop all of you from living in fear." As they spoke, a shadow shifted near the doorway. It was Master Yao, making his way inside with slow, steady steps. "Chen," the old man said, "I know you don't want to be found, but Huo Jian's men are already moving. Rumor has it he's hired fighters from other villages, trained men, and he's paying well to find whoever humiliated him today." Mei Lin's eyes widened. Chen only breathed in, accepting what he could no longer avoid. "So he's already made his move." Master Yao nodded. "And now, my boy, it's your turn." Chen set the boot down, stood up with quiet determination, and adjusted his straw hat. His broad shoulders seemed to grow, not from pride, but from duty. It was as if the true Chen, the one the world had forgotten, was beginning to awaken. "If Huo Jian wants to find me," he said, "he won't have to look far. I'll go to him." Mei Lin tried to protest. "Chen, that's insane. There are too many of them." "I don't need to fight all of them," he replied. "Just enough to make it clear that Huangshi isn't a village of cowards." And with that, he stepped out of the workshop, walking straight toward the unknown. One man, an entire village depending on him, and an enemy who wasn't used to hearing the word no. The conflict had officially begun. As Chen Huan walked down Huangshi's main street, something that once felt simple began to shift. The entire village, so used to looking away from its own problems, now watched every step he took. It wasn't just curiosity. It was the sense that something inevitable had finally arrived. The shoemaker who once blended into the background now carried expectations he never asked for, but would never run from. Responsibility like that was something he knew far too well. But as he moved forward, another figure slipped through the narrow alleyways. Mei Lin. She kept her distance, trying not to draw attention, yet determined to understand why this man, a complete mystery, would risk his peace for someone he barely knew. She wasn't naive. She understood exactly who Huo Jian was. He wasn't just another local tyrant. He had deals with merchants, corrupt officials, and even neighboring villages. Huangshi, though small, was a strategic piece on a board much larger than most people realized. Challenging the Chiang brothers wasn't just an act of defiance, it was a direct blow to the entire system of intimidation Huo had built. While Mei Lin followed Chen, the rest of the village buzzed with rumors. One stood out above the rest. Huo Jian had summoned Zhen Yu, an experienced fighter known as the Tiger of Rongshan. He had a reputation for solving problems for powerful leaders, not with brute strength, but with precision and calculation. A complete contrast to the Shanyu giants, where they used raw force. Zhen Yu used strategy, and that perhaps made him the most dangerous threat of all. In a tavern near Huo's warehouse, Zhen Yu listened as the humiliated brothers recounted what happened. He didn't laugh at them. He didn't mock them. He didn't even smirk. Instead, he studied everything, their posture, their hesitation, their confusion. "He dodged before I even struck," Chang Tao said, rubbing his arm. "It was like he knew what I was going to do." Zhen Yu tapped his fingers lightly on the wooden table. "It's not that he knew," he replied calmly. "He felt it. That doesn't come naturally. That comes from years, maybe decades, of training." He turned his focus to Huo Jian. "Are you sure you want this?" he asked. "There's a difference between controlling a village and waking someone who spent their whole life preparing to face problems far bigger than you." Huo smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "I don't lose to anyone. Not to a shoemaker, not to a ghost from the past." He challenged my authority, and people who do that disappear. Power, money, fear. That was how Huo Jian solved everything. But while he planned his next move, the village prepared in its own way. Master Yao quietly gathered a small group in the writing school. He knew Chen would never speak of his past, so he decided to share the little he knew. "Chen's strength isn't just physical," the old man explained. There are martial arts schools that train body and mind with a discipline most people will never witness. The Silent Wind School is one of the oldest. Its disciples learn techniques that combine perception, balance, and the reading of movement. A young man raised his hand. If he's so skilled, why become a shoemaker? Master Yao sighed, recalling stories he had heard decades earlier. Sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who are most desperate to escape battle. Outside, Malin finally caught up to Chen. He had stopped near the small bridge that crossed the village's narrow river, staring at the flowing water, deep in thought. "You don't have to do this alone," she said, trying to steady her breath. "The village may be afraid, yes, but that doesn't mean you have to carry everything on your shoulders." Chen waited a few seconds before answering. "You know what happens when someone stands up to men like Huo Jian?" Mei Lin shook her head. "He doesn't strike the strong first," Chen continued. "He goes after the weak, the unprepared, the innocent. And once he finds a vulnerable point, he presses until it breaks." Her eyes widened. "So, you think he'll come after me?" Chen didn't answer, and that silence said everything. Mei Lin drew in a shaky breath, trying not to show the fear tightening her chest. "If that's the case, then I'm not hiding. I won't let him use me against you. I'd rather stand with you than sit and wait for whatever he decides to do." Chen turned to her with a look that carried genuine respect. "You're braver than you realize." Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the distance. Steady, confident, trained. Both of them turned. Emerging from the soft afternoon mist was a tall man with flawless posture and eyes that seemed to analyze everything at once. Zhen Yu had arrived, and with him, the true confrontation began to take shape. The man who stood before them was nothing like the Chiang brothers, nor like Huo Jian's usual thugs. His presence was quiet, yet overwhelming. He was the kind of figure who didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. Zhen Yu, the tiger of Rongshan, was known for defeating opponents before ever laying a hand on them, through strategy, not brute force. His posture was flawless, hands relaxed at his sides, steps measured, breathing steady. Every movement looked pre-planned, as if he had already mapped out the next 10 seconds. And when his eyes met Chen Huan's, there was an unspoken exchange, not of immediate hostility, but of recognition. It was as if Chen were looking into a mirror. Milin instinctively stepped back. "Is that him?" she whispered. Chen didn't take his eyes off the newcomer. "That's him." Zhen Yu stopped a few yards away, far enough to show respect, close enough to make it clear this wasn't casual conversation. "Chen Huan," he said, voice low and composed. "The whole village is talking about you, and the Chiang brothers too. You did something no one else dared to do." "Defend someone?" Chen replied evenly. A faint smile tugged at the corner of Zhen Yu's mouth. "No, stand up to Huo Jian." Mei Lin swallowed hard. Unlike the bullies, this man didn't try to intimidate with volume, and that made him infinitely more dangerous. Chen remained steady. "I'm not standing up to Huo Jian. I just didn't let two men hurt an innocent girl." Zhen Yu tilted his head slightly. "That's exactly the problem. To Huo Jian, any act of compassion is an act of rebellion, and rebellion he does not tolerate." A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the sound of water flowing under the bridge. Mei Lin watched them like someone witnessing two storms approaching each other. Zhen Yu continued, "Before anything else, understand this. I didn't come here for pleasure. Huo hired me, but I'm not his dog. I choose my fights." Chen narrowed his eyes. "Then why come here?" Zhen Yu drew a slow breath, as if unveiling something he rarely shared. "Because you're different. I've seen strong fighters. Fast fighters, highly trained fighters. But someone who controls energy, balance, and body reading at the same time, that's rare. You don't fight to win. You fight to avoid fighting. That kind of thing only comes from the Silent Wind School." Mei Lin blinked, stunned. "So, you know the school too?" Zhen Yu nodded. "My master spoke of it often. He said that if I ever met a disciple from there, I should treat him with respect. He paused. But respect doesn't cancel a job. Huojian wants a demonstration, and if I refuse, he'll send others. Violent ones, men who don't know how to measure anything. Meilin's eyes widened. So you're going to fight Chen? Zhen Yu looked at her with an unsettling calm. I don't want to, but I want to prevent something worse. Sometimes one fight prevents a war. Chen drew in a long breath. There was understanding in his gaze. Zhen Yu, despite being hired by Huojian, wasn't an enemy. He was a reflection of what Chen might have become if he hadn't walked away from the martial world. If fighting me will stop Huojian from hurting innocent people, Chen said, then I accept. Meilin spun toward him, shocked. Chen, no, he's trained, Chen raised his hand, gently requesting silence. Don't worry, I'm not fighting to destroy. I'm fighting to teach. A simple sentence, yet heavy with an entire philosophy. Zhen Yu exhaled, accepting what felt like an ancient ritual. Then we do this at dawn, he declared, in the open field behind the hill, away from the village. No innocent will be dragged into this. Chen nodded. Dawn it is. Zhen Yu turned to leave, but paused, delivering one final warning. Huojian won't be satisfied with just a fight. He wants to break you, and if you fall, the village falls with you. Meilin felt the world close in around her. But if you win, Zhen Yu added, you'll light a fire that Huojian will never be able to extinguish. Then he disappeared down the road, leaving behind the thick air of an unavoidable fate. Meilin turned to Chen, her voice trembling. Why did you agree? Why step into a fight that isn't even yours? Chen placed a hand gently on her shoulder, a surprising gesture from someone so powerful. Because sometimes the right fight appears when no one else is able to carry it. You, and right there beside the bridge, under a sky slowly darkening, Meilin finally understood. Chen Huan wasn't just the village's mysterious shoemaker. He was the line Huojian should never have crossed. The confirmation of the duel between Chen Huan and Zhen Yu spread through Huangshi faster than any official announcement ever could. There were no posters, no messengers, no meetings. All it took was a whisper on the street for every home, workshop, and tavern to fill with tension. The entire village seemed to breathe in uneven rhythm, as if every resident could feel the electricity of something far too big to ignore. The elders remembered old tales of duels between masters, encounters that were never simple fights, but collisions of philosophy, technique, and destiny. The children watched everything with fascination, unaware that behind the elegance of the movements lay real danger. The merchants and farmers feared something else entirely, Huojian's reaction. Everyone knew he wouldn't pass up the chance to turn the duel into a display of power. That night, Chen's workshop felt like another world. The dim lantern light stretched across scattered tools, unfinished boots, and a floor worn by months of work. Chen sat the way he always did, but something different weighed on his expression, a blend of quiet calm and unspoken concern. He didn't fear the fight. He feared what would come after. The door opened slowly, revealing Meilin with eyes shimmering. I can't sleep, she confessed, her voice low, almost breaking. I keep thinking about what might happen, about what Huojian could do afterward. No one can think about anything else. Chen glanced at her trembling hands. Meilin, I promised I would protect you and this village, and I intend to keep that promise no matter what happens. She stepped forward, fighting the knot rising in her throat. But why? She asked, voice unsteady. You don't owe us anything. You don't owe me anything. Why carry this burden alone? Chen drew a deep breath before answering, like someone reaching for old words he hadn't spoken in years. Because I already lost a place I should have protected, and I won't let that happen again. Meilin froze. Is that why you left the Silent Wind School? A flicker of pain crossed Chen's face. The school fell because I hesitated. I had the strength to stop a disaster, but I chose silence. Since then, I've lived avoiding conflict, convincing myself that staying away from the world would keep others safe. But today I understood something. Running from battles doesn't prevent them from hurting innocent people. It only turns us into spectators. The raw honesty in his voice cracked something inside her. So that's it. You're fighting because you finally stopped running. Chen nodded slowly. And because someone needs to show Huo Jian that his power ends where one man's courage begins. Outside, the village was also preparing. Master Yao had gathered a small group inside the writing school. People whispered, some holding candles, others twisting their hands nervously. If Chen wins, murmured Hui the merchant, this might be our chance to end Huo Jian's control once and for all. And if he loses? A woman asked, barely audible. No one answered. Silence did. Meanwhile, in the large house at the north end of the village, the atmosphere was completely different. Huo Jian stared at the moon through the window, fingers tapping the sill. Tomorrow, he said, the village will understand there is no power beyond mine. Behind him, Changbei and Changtao stood quietly, the defeated shadows of men trying to rebuild their pride. Zhen Yu, however, sat in a simple chair with his eyes closed, meditating. He was never part of Huo's game. Not truly. He was there by choice, and for reasons only he seemed to understand. Are you ready? Huo asked without turning. Always, Zhen Yu replied, eyes still closed. But not for you. Huo's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond. Back in the workshop, Mei Lin finally summoned the courage to ask the question that haunted her. Can you win? She whispered. Chen didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood, fetched a small wooden box and set it in front of her. Inside lay an old pair of gloves, worn but still strong. These belong to my master, he said. He taught me that true strength isn't in the blow you land, but in the one you're able to avoid. And tomorrow, I intend to prove that. Mei Lin touched the gloves reverently, as if she could feel the years woven into their leather. I believe in you, she said firmly. And the village does too. Chen smiled, a small, sincere, rare smile. Then I already have enough. Outside, the wind swept through the narrow street like an omen. The next morning, the duel wouldn't just be a fight. It would define the future of Huangxi. Dawn over Huangxi felt different that morning. The sunlight didn't just bring brightness. It carried expectation, fear, hope. And as the first rays touched the weathered rooftops, the entire village awoke to a moment that would be remembered for decades. Chen Huan left his workshop in silence. He carried no weapons, no shield, nothing but his body, his breath, and his discipline. He walked slowly, almost as if each step were a quiet farewell. Not because he expected to die, but because he knew that whatever happened, his life would never be the same. Mei Lin followed him, but this time without hesitation. She was no longer the defenseless young woman who had been dragged through the streets by the Chang brothers. She had changed. The fear was still there, of course, but now there was something new in her eyes. Resolve. The ability to stand before danger and still say no. Did you sleep? Chen asked as they walked the narrow road leading to the hill. I tried, she said with a sad smile. So did I. The honesty in his voice surprised her. He didn't pretend to be invincible. He was real, human. As they continued, villagers began stepping out of their homes, watching in silence. Some formed signs of good luck with their hands. Others bowed their heads, a gesture of deep, almost ritualistic respect. No one came too close, but everyone followed. Little by little, a silent procession formed behind them. When they reached the base of the hill, Chen stopped. The open field, surrounded by tall trees and the river twisting just beyond, looked as though it had been crafted specifically for a duel. A soft breeze lifted piles of dry leaves, creating a scene that felt almost cinematic. Zhen Yu was already there. He stood motionless in the center of the field, eyes closed, body still as stone. It was the posture of a man who turned breath into weaponry, of someone who saw battle not as a clash of bodies, but as an extension of the mind. When Chen approached, Zhen Yu opened his eyes slowly. "I wondered if you would come," he said. "I always come when someone calls me by name," Chen replied. Zhen Yu nodded, calm and composed. "For years I've trained to become the best, but I've always heard stories about the disciples of the Silent Wind School. Stories that taught me technique isn't everything, speed isn't everything, strength isn't everything. You embody those stories." Chen took a steady breath. "That school doesn't exist anymore. I'm just a man trying to do what's right." Zhen Yu smiled faintly. "Which is exactly why it still lives." The crowd, now much larger, spread around the field. No one stepped too close. There was an instinctive respect for what was about to unfold. Master Yao moved among the spectators, leaning on his cane. His aged eyes watched the scene with the clarity of someone who had seen many destinies forged in silence. "He's ready," the old man murmured. Mei Lin stood with her heart pounding, barely able to breathe. Not from fear of the fight, but from fear of losing the man who had quietly transformed her life. Zhen Yu took one step forward. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to know, are you fighting to protect or to prove something?" Chen looked straight at him. There was no hesitation. "I'm fighting so this village won't have to live on its knees." Zhen Yu closed his eyes briefly, letting the words sink in. "Then you've already won half the battle." They took their places at the center of the field. Their breathing slowed, deepened, sharpened. The silence that followed was so intense even the birds seemed to hold their voices. And in that moment, mere seconds before the first movement, Chen felt a clarity he had spent years avoiding. He had finally stopped running. This duel wasn't just against Zhen Yu, it was against his own shadows, against the weight of his past failure, against the fear that had haunted him since the fall of the school. But here, standing before a worthy opponent, he understood something. He did not have to be defined by his past. He could redefine himself now. This was what overcoming truly meant, not erasing mistakes, but choosing better in the present. Zhen Yu raised his right hand in salute. Chen mirrored the gesture. Mei Lin clenched her hands tightly, as if holding their fate between her fingers. Master Yao whispered, voice trembling with emotion, "May the wind guide your steps, boy." And then, before the first strike, before the first movement, before the first clash of energy, Chen understood another truth. He wasn't alone anymore. The village stood with him, Mei Lin stood with him, and even his past no longer held him prisoner. It no longer weighed him down. It had become purpose. And when the first exchange began, it was no mere duel. It was the rebirth of Chen Huan. The open field behind the hill felt suspended in time. The wind drifted through the trees, lifting specks of golden dust that danced in the air as if they had a life of their own. It was the kind of scene storytellers would use for years, maybe decades, the setting for an encounter destined to change everyone's fate. Chen Huan and Zhen Yu stood motionless at the center of the natural circle formed by the villagers. Their feet grounded firmly in the earth, not as if resisting it, but as if recognizing it as an ally. Their breathing was deep, slow, synchronized, two warriors connected by an invisible thread. The silence was so absolute that any sound felt forbidden. Until something shifted. Zhen Yu opened his eyes. Chen did the same. And in that instant, the air itself seemed to vibrate. The villagers didn't understand techniques. They didn't know names of styles or ancient philosophies. But instinctively they recognized this wasn't a fight. It was a ritual, an old ceremony, two forces of equal respect, preparing not to destroy each other, but to reveal truth. Zhen Yu took the first step, soft as silk, a simple movement, but weighted with meaning. Chen answered with a step just as gentle. It was like watching a conversation spoken only through the body. Watching from outside the circle, Mei Lin felt her heart pound so loudly it echoed in her head. She had never seen anything like this. There were no attacks, no strikes, no violence. It was a precise dance, a silent study. Zhen Yu spoke first, without breaking the flow of movement. My master used to say every warrior carries two battles, the one outside and the one within. The outer one is easy. The inner one, that's the real test. Chen stayed focused, replying as he moved. My master said a true fighter wins when he no longer needs to fight. Zhen Yu nodded softly. Then we're saying the same thing, just walking different paths. Their steps continued, circling one another. The crowd held its breath, unable to understand, but completely pulled into the tension. Master Yao, leaning on his cane, murmured to himself, "They're measuring spirit, not body, watching who breaks first, who breathes wrong, who loses the axis, who loses the center." But while that silent duel unfolded, something else moved in the shadows by the trees. Huo Jian's men had arrived. They appeared like silhouettes slipping between the trunks, silent, deliberate, positioning themselves with precision. They didn't enter the circle, didn't interfere, at least not yet. But their presence alone changed the air. Meilin noticed it first. Her heart turned cold. "Chen," she whispered, without looking away from him. Zhen Yu noticed too. His posture shifted, subtle enough that villagers missed it, but clear as day to Chen. "He brought men," Zhen Yu murmured, lips barely moving. Chen answered the same way. "I know. This isn't part of the duel," Zhen Yu said quietly. "For Huo Jian, nothing has to be part of anything," Chen replied. Zhen Yu exhaled, slow, heavy, resigned. "So that's it. The duel isn't his goal. It's the distraction." Chen felt the tension rising but kept his calm. He couldn't let fear break the flow. Not yet. Behind them, the villagers began to notice the armed men. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hands trembled. The hope that had grown overnight began to waver, but Meilin, trembling yet defiant, stepped forward, placing herself between the villagers and the looming threat. "Don't move!" one of Huo Jian's men shouted. "Stay where you are!" The shout sliced through the silence like a blade. Zhen Yu narrowed his eyes, frustration flickering across his face. "He didn't trust me," he said bitterly. "He brought backup. This isn't a fair fight." Chen answered calmly. "Huo Jian doesn't know what fairness is. He only knows what's convenient for him." Zhen Yu shifted his stance, grounding himself. "Then we'll have to finish this quickly, before he turns this duel into punishment." Chen nodded, and in that instant, everything changed. Zhen Yu moved first. Chen countered. Their motions were fast, precise, almost invisible, like lightning striking twice in silence. The crowd staggered back, a mix of awe and fear. The wind kicked up dust around them, forming a dramatic halo in the field. But deep in both fighters' eyes, something was clear. The real climax wouldn't be between them alone, because while they fought, Huo Jian appeared at the top of the hill, watching with a cold smile. He had come to witness the end of Chen, of Zhen Yu, or of the entire village. The true storm was about to break, and no one there was ready for what came next. The wind blew harder when Huo Jian appeared at the top of the hill. His silhouette, towering, flanked by armed enforcers, made the villagers instinctively step back. The duel between Chen Huan and Zhen Yu, which moments earlier felt like the center of the world, suddenly became a mere detail compared to the threat now looming over them. Zhen Yu noticed the shift immediately. His expression, once calm and focused, now showed something he hadn't revealed before. Outrage. He had never tolerated unfair conditions. Huo Jian had hired him for a duel, yet what he was seeing now broke every code of honor. "He came to break the village's spirit," Zhen Yu murmured, eyes fixed on Huo Jian's men. Chen stayed poised, though anyone who knew what to look for could see the tension rippling beneath his stillness. "He came to make sure no one ever stands up again," he replied. Their silent duel was over. This wasn't a fight between two masters anymore. This was a battle against a man who believed himself greater than everyone else. Huo Jian descended the hill with slow, measured steps, every movement calculated to intimidate. "So this is where the great shoemaker became a hero," he mocked. And you, Zhen Yu, you should have finished this long ago. Zhen Yu lifted his chin, unshaken. You hired me for a duel, not to participate in an execution. I hire for whatever I want, Huo Jian said with a cynical smile. And now, I want this village to learn its final lesson. He flicked his hand. His enforcers began moving forward. Mei Lin stepped forward instinctively, her heart lodged in her throat. Several villagers followed her, but none of them had the strength to stop what was coming. Chen saw panic spreading across the crowd, and in that instant, his mind flashed back years to the fall of his school, to the destruction of his fellow disciples, to the hesitation that had cost lives. He had run to Huangxi to escape that past, but now there was no more running. Zhen Yu, sensing exactly what Chen was preparing to do, moved closer. Listen, he whispered. If you go into this alone, you won't be able to protect them all. Chen didn't respond. Zhen Yu continued. But if we both go in, then yes. For the first time, Mei Lin saw Chen smile in the middle of chaos. A small, grounded smile, like someone who had finally found where he belonged. Huo Jian raised his hand again, impatient. Finish them. The enforcers charged, and that was the moment when everything erupted. Chen and Zhen Yu moved at the same time, no longer opponents, but a single unified force. Zhen Yu spun out of the first attacker's reach, redirecting the strike into empty space. Chen intercepted another with a smooth shift of balance, sending the man stumbling without a single forbidden strike. It was choreography, precise, hypnotic, a blend of technique and strategy that felt almost unreal. The villagers watched with open mouths. It was like seeing two legendary schools fighting side by side. The enforcers, though numerous, were uncoordinated. They fought with strength. But strength without technique is like walking blind. Chen and Zhen Yu flowed around them, dodging, redirecting, neutralizing, always controlled, always precise. Chaos spread. Huo Jian, who had been smirking moments earlier, now clenched his fists in growing rage. Useless, he roared. All of you! One of the enforcers lunged toward Mei Lin, but Chen saw it, even with his back turned. He pivoted sharply, sliding across the ground with calculated precision, placing himself between her and the threat like a human shield. Zhen Yu covered the left flank. Chen guarded the right. For the first time in years, the villagers saw hope taking shape before their eyes. Huo Jian lost patience. Enough, he shouted. I'll end this myself. He stormed forward, pulling from his belt a reinforced wooden baton. It wasn't a lethal weapon, but it was dangerous enough to inflict serious harm. Zhen Yu tightened his jaw. He'll go for you first. Chen answered calmly. I know. When Huo Jian reached him, raising the baton high, Chen didn't step back. He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. The same hesitation that had destroyed his school was gone. Huo Jian swung, a hard, brutal, angry strike. Chen stepped aside at the exact moment of impact, letting the baton's force travel unchecked. He touched Huo Jian's arm with just 2 fingers, only 2, and redirected the attack downward, knocking him completely off balance. Huo Jian stumbled, dropped the baton, fell to his knees. The entire village held its breath. Chen approached him, not aggressively, but firmly. Your power ends here. Huo Jian lifted his head, humiliated, unable to comprehend how he was kneeling before the man he'd called a worthless shoemaker. And in that moment, everyone understood. Real power had never been about strength. It had always been about courage, and Huangxi had finally awakened. Huo Jian remained on his knees, unable to comprehend how the entire structure of intimidation he had built over the years had crumbled in a matter of minutes. It hadn't been brutal strikes. It wasn't physical humiliation. It was the quiet strength of someone fighting for something greater than himself, something Huo Jian would never understand, the courage to protect. His enforcers froze as they watched their leader defeated. The moment that was supposed to showcase Huojian's power had turned into the greatest dismantling of his authority. They exchanged glances, unsure of what to do. The confidence they had always worn like armor evaporated. Zhen Yu stepped forward slowly. His footsteps were calm, not threatening. "It's over, Huojian," he said firmly, without hatred. "You've lost the respect of these people, and without respect, no power survives." Huo tried to muster a response, but wounded pride crushed the words in his throat. In front of the entire village, he knew there was no way back. The villagers approached one by one, still cautious, as if testing whether what they were seeing was real. Mei Lin, however, didn't hesitate. She walked toward Chen, eyes shining, heart beating as if she'd lived 3 lifetimes in a single morning. "You did this," she said, voice trembling. "You gave us back our freedom." Chen, still breathing steadily after the confrontation, shook his head. "I only took the first step. The village did the rest." Mr. Yao leaned on his staff, stepping closer with a rare but proud smile. "You can try hiding who you are, boy. But in the end, a man's true nature always finds its way out. Today, you proved something far beyond fighting styles or secret techniques. You proved humanity." Zhen Yu crossed his arms, taking in the scene. "You fought better than many masters I've met," he admitted. "Not because you won, but because you never lost control." Chen looked at him with genuine respect. "And you didn't fight for money. You fought for justice. That's what saved this village." Zhen Yu allowed himself a small smile. "Maybe our paths aren't so different after all." Meanwhile, the villagers gathered around. Some cried, others simply watched in silence, as if the courage inside them was slowly awakening. For the first time in years, Huang Shi breathed without fear. Huojian finally stood, without pride, only resignation. "You'll regret this," he muttered, trying to salvage a shred of authority. Chen stepped forward, not as a threat, but as truth. "No," he said, "because today this village saw what happens when someone chooses to stand." Huojian stepped back. His enforcers followed, and for the first time Huang Shi watched its tyrant leave, without being followed by fear. Mei Lin released a long breath, as if years of weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "And now?" she asked with a timid smile. Chen looked around. The field, the people, the place that had once been his refuge, and was now his home. "Now," he said, "the village starts again, and so do I." Then and so, under a sun finally shining without shadows, Huang Shi was reborn. In the weeks that followed, Huang Shi transformed quietly but profoundly. People walked the streets with their heads held high, as if reclaiming the right to breathe. Chen's workshop became a gathering place, not out of curiosity but gratitude. Zhen Yu left in peace, promising to return someday. Mei Lin, now more confident than ever, walked beside Chen as part of the future they had helped rebuild. And every morning, when the shoemaker opened his windows, the village knew fear would never return while he was there. If this story touched you, if Chen's courage, Mei Lin's strength, or Huang Shi's rebirth inspired you, leave a like so more people can discover this video. Tell us in the comments which moment hit you the hardest, and share this with someone who needs strength today. It helps the channel grow and keep stories like this alive. And if you're new here, subscribe now to join us for the next emotional, powerful, unforgettable stories. Here, every tale is crafted to reach you deeply.